Hi, team. Welcome back to I think this is episode number 64. That's amazing, isn't it? I started this out. If you go back to the first one, it's literally me making beatboxing noises, and I don't think there was any rhythm in it. But today we had a special guest, and his name is Minter Dial. So he's a leadership coach, massive into his paddle, and just general all-around great guy. Great guy to talk to, great guy to listen to. He's had loads of experience. And I think today's episode is really interesting because one of the main points that Mint talks about is obviously finding meaning and purpose in struggles and the importance of awakening. So waking people up and how we stop just going through the motions and what effect we can actually have. So I think it's a really good one to listen to if you're in that kind of space in life. Also, while you listen to this, I'm going to let you know that we're going to start our 5-day challenge soon in 2 weeks' time. So if you've done it before, get a friend on it. If you're keen to do it again, then sign up on our waiting list and see what comes your way. We're really excited this time because obviously every time we do it, we make it that much better. Right, enjoy the episode. Okay, so welcome back to the Identity Human podcast with your host, Don. There's no Ray today, but we do have a special guest in one Mr. Minter Dial. And we have interacted before, and it's great to get you onto the podcast because I think you've got a fascinating story. I did have a squeeze at your website, and it's fascinating, obviously, because the first thing you see is like leadership, brand, and transformation. And then you've got your stats. So I've got them here, like delivered more than 600 international talks, hosted over 800 podcast episodes. That's incredible, by the way, because I know that, so that's in the top 1% of the top 1%, because most only get it to episode 25. So to give people context, created more than 2,300 blog posts. That's amazing because that wasn't done in the last 2 years when AI was here, I imagine. That was you literally handwriting them all and going through it. And published 5 award-winning books. So that's, and I know you've got one underway. Do you want to plug that quickly, or is that a future plug?
Well, no. I mean, I've actually published now 7 books.
Amazing.
A few of them are award winners, but a couple not. And the new one is called The Avatar Trap. I've been writing about it. I've mentioned it in one of my books already. And I think it's so important for our society that we get a grip on this whole idea of how we represent ourselves. The Avatar Trap is the trap that so many people fall into in how they represent themselves incorrectly and detached from reality.
Yeah, I like that. I think the Avatar Trap is quite descriptive in its own, and I'm interpretive, so I am interpreting that avatar is looking at people's identity and how we don't question what we're taking on.
No doubt. And I mean, the funny thing, or the way that this became a reality, is the avatar is such a common word in our parlance today. Everyone thinks they know what an avatar is, but actually they absolutely got it wrong. I would wager anyone who's listening would think that an avatar is some kind of digital representation of myself or a film, and therefore a digital representation of some characters. However, it turns out that the reality is, unlike the avatar that we think about, which is usually a little bit of a better version of me that can live on digitally forever because, it'll be digital, unlike me. That's the avatars that we're creating today. The avatar comes from the Hindu religion, and it's actually the entire reverse. It's a human, mortal version of God, as opposed to what we do, which is a godlike, immortal version of us.
Yeah, wow, I like that. That's deep. I love it. Can I sign up to be first on the book?
Please do. Please do.
Sold one already. I mean, just on some of the other books. So there was one particular one that obviously tells a story, The Last Ring Home. What was that like? That's got a story to it, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And a film. It's a documentary film for television that's been seen by 25 million people or so. Wow. Now, so what's interesting about that story? First of all, there's the Yankee American Minter who needs to know who he is and his roots. But more saliently, because the research is about my grandfather, after whom I was named, I met 130 veterans of the Second World War, most of whom had been prisoners of the Japanese. And in the throwaway statistic department, in the Philippines, roughly 42% of all prisoners were killed as prisoners, which, aside from anything else, suggests that it was pretty horrible in prison camp. And secondly, it was a much higher rate of death than if you were on the battlefield. Most battlefronts, that type of death rate is not what happens. I mean, it did happen in
Oh,
certain old
yeah.
Crusader days where everyone was slaughtered and all that sort of stuff. But in today's warfare, that's a particularly high number. And the key point is here: I met some people who went through some significant difficulty. I mean, as difficult as it gets, dealing with malaria, dysentery, mosquitoes, no food, having your nails pulled out, um, and all sorts of ignominious tortures. And then, of course, mostly dying. So we in today's world, we sort of tend to get worried about the scratch of our BMW. I jest, but oh my gosh,
Yeah.
we've got it lucky. So the idea that about that book, The Last Ring Home, except for there's an extraordinary story about this ring, this crazy, batshit crazy kind of story about how this ring traveled the world, changed hands 6 times, and reappeared 18 years after it got lost. Um, is that we live in tremendously good times, and we need to have more perspective before we start complaining about the price of the tube or the oh, it's raining again. Gosh, get over it.
Yeah. I mean, I wish we could just say that to more people more often, isn't it? Mogul Dat, I think, Mogul Dat is Google X CEO. He's
Yes,
got
yeah.
like Formula for Happiness. He, on a podcast like 4 years ago, he was like, just learn to look down. And I was like, oh, that's quite condescending. He's like, looking down means that you're in a place of privilege. And all you have to do sometimes when you think that you've got it tough is find someone else who's got it tougher than you, and immediately you're grateful, which is that exact thing. Like the BMW scratch, or you've got a dent in your door. It just doesn't matter. But how often do you walk and someone is stressing their whole life out about it? I think we need to find a bit more perspective, which takes me on to, I really struggle sometimes to jump into the whole narrative of trying to, this is my story, this is why it's important to follow me as a coach or look at our brand and all that kind of stuff, because I'm like, I've already found perspective. I've already gone, like, I've come from Zimbabwe, I've seen what some, like, where people live, I've gone to South Africa, I've driven through townships. Like, you can tell me that my life is tough in so many different ways. I'm like, it ain't, because I've seen firsthand what other people have to live by, and we are so privileged. And I find it really tough sometimes to tell my story, because I'm like, I'm already comparing it to that person, and no one wants to hear me go up and be like, I'm extremely privileged because this is my life and I've seen this. So it's a dichotomy at the moment of what it takes at the moment to play the game of LinkedIn, of popularity, of branding, of attracting people to send your message out, because it's forcing you to make your perspective seem like it's been so tough. But correct me if I'm wrong, at the same time, everything's relative.
Well, my thing is, what message are we trying to achieve? And breaking through is the key point. So your stories are going to contribute to it, but somehow it's finding ways to wake people up.
Yeah.
I mean, the word woke comes from it, but that all sorts of other things come from that. But the idea is that I feel, living in a time of deep existential crisis, and within that we also have a crisis of meaning. So most people who actually get into this idea of, oh, we're living in a crisis of meaning existence, are have had some kind of wake up call.
Yeah.
And part of that wake up call usually is either a near death experience, or just I'm getting old and actually I'm getting closer to dying than I am to being born. And oh my gosh, time is short. Oh my gosh, what's important to me? So as I'm an old man now, I've had several near death experiences,
Yeah.
and the idea is to transmit some sort of level of urgency to say, before having to have a near death experience, a midlife crisis, or the fact that you're going to die, get on the ship now, get on the boat, get on the bus, and get with the interesting program of life, as opposed to complaining about my third house, I'm paying too much taxes, or the scratch on my BMW.
So, what would you say to someone if they were sat in front of you and you wanted to wake them up, and they've just been complaining about the scratch in their BMW, and Yeah. What would your approach be?
Well, I'd listen first,
Yeah.
because just hammering down on any old nail with the hammer that I have won't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
So I need to figure out what's in front of me. Do I have a screw? Do I have a thumbtack? Do I have a big old nail, or maybe a splinter on a wooden log? And understand what's in front of me, and then try to figure out how to get through it. The thing that the telltale signs are things like, how do you manage time? Are you on top of it, or is it just overwhelming you? In which case, how do you choose how you spend the most valuable thing that you have, which is your time? Then the second telltale sign is your energy level. How is your energy? And of course, if I'm talking to someone who's 25 or 35, young and vibrant, it's a little bit less pregnant, the issue.
Yeah.
But still, I'll see people say, I'm tired, I'm not sleeping well, or I don't have enough time for me, and or um, I'm feeling overwhelmed by so many things. And as you get to end of your 30s, typically issues like, well, do I want to continue the gravy train, or the boat that is the career path? Because I've already got a mortgage, I have a couple of kids to pay through school, I'm married, and oh my gosh, there's a lot of pressure on me.
Yeah.
And so this is what I've been told to do. I went to school because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. I studied hard because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. I took a job, a well-paying job with a great business card and title, and that's what I thought I was to do. But me, I'm totally unfulfilled within that. So that's where the energy is lacking.
Yeah.
You might do what you have to do because that's what life's about. You also need to just shut up and do shit.
Yeah.
However, it comes at a cost if it's not relative to something that gives back to you energy. So these are the type of telltale signs I look at when I'm trying to wake somebody up. But so many people just keep on cruising and think it's about the fourth house in Tuscany,
Yeah.
and more money, and more albatrosses around your neck.
I think that's the insight into effective leadership is recognizing that people have that grit and they have that resilience to just keep carrying on, so they don't question their realities because they feel like they're contributing to kids, house, mortgage, society. Even if they're not happy, they go, it doesn't matter. Whereas actually effective leadership, I imagine, if you've got a different opinion, is recognizing that when you're asking people to do something, you are asking them to do it at certain costs, and how grateful are you that they're doing that, or how are you going to make sure that you creating an environment where that cost isn't coming to their downfall in the future. Whereas I think
Yeah, it's a
sometimes that gets forgotten.
yeah, it's a little bit this hard notion of sometimes you just got to do shit.
Yeah.
And I have a friend I interviewed who, Faisal Haq, he said, when I was 19, I was an immigrant and I came over to the United States from Bangladesh, and I was a janitor to make ends meet, because that's what it was. And he said, I'll never forget how my fellow janitor one day said to me, become one with the floor. And what was lovely about that was there's a sense of being at peace with what you're doing.
Yeah.
The bigger element of it is actually finding some karmic or bigger purpose. So the floor you're cleaning is actually floor on which scientists are walking every day, let's just say,
Yeah.
or whatever. And these scientists are contributing to some kind of innovation, some kind of research. Maybe it's a cancer drug, maybe it's how to get to the moon or Mars, and therefore relating the fact that I'm cleaning the floor and helping people get to Mars. So there's a little bit of a mojo in there that's maybe narrative creating to help you, on the one hand, get that grit, determination, tackle that person, throw your body into whatever is needed. Sometimes it's just what you got to do.
Yeah.
But if you can link it somehow to a bigger purpose, so that tackle of that back in that game helped us change the momentum of the season, because what we wanted in that season was this. And if you can tie that tackle into this bigger season's objective, to which everybody agrees. By the way, the issue there is that everyone wants to win. So making your objective something more missionary, bigger than just you and the win,
Yeah.
In other words, for example, the 15,000 people who come to see you every week play or whatever it is, that and make them happy, that becomes a little bit more interesting than just making me win, have a bigger title, a bigger salary and such.
Yeah, it's a goal bigger than yourself. And it leads me nicely into the next question I've been trying to hold on, but trying to listen to. So I'm glad I'm getting it out here. Is what's your bigger goal? So the goal bigger than yourself. So why is it important that you're stressing the message of helping people, wake up? How does that serve you?
Right. Well, a little story in the realm of storytelling. So, for most of my youth, up until I was 37, I was a guy on a fast track. I was the youngest member of the executive committee of L'Oreal Worldwide.
Wow.
I was, like the what's called a BSD, with big and swinging for the first two
Yeah, I
letters,
got you. I got you. I played
keeping this
rugby. So yeah.
child friendly. And then I basically had an awakening that stimulated me out of my doldrums. I mean, I was traveling 200 days a year, having quite an extraordinary life. But the big awakening happened when I out of my window on 47th and 5th Avenue in Manhattan. On the 11th of September, I saw a second airplane, having already seen the first explosion in the North Tower. I mean, I actually saw the
Wow.
fireball. And now I'm looking by myself in my office, corner office, and I see a second airplane, and I'm like, I wonder what that is. I've flown 100 hours myself as a pilot, and I mean, something like that. And I've done a lot of flying. And anyway, so I watch this airplane, and lo and behold, it then disappears out of my vision and then comes back and slams into the South Tower. Oh my gosh, selling shampoos? Huh. I got to do something more than that. So it really it wasn't an instantaneous thing. I'm thinking about my friends in the tower, where are my children, my
Yeah.
wife, all my colleagues. I had 4 friends who were killed. So there are lots of little other things that cramped my style, let's say. But then I sat back and I started thinking about, well, what can I do in my life that's going to make me really feel a little bit more fulfilled than making people's hair cleaner? And so the company I was running at the time was called Redken, Redken,
Yeah.
hairdresser brand, and uh, and they already had a purpose. It's just that I hadn't really connected into it
Yeah.
and lent into it. Anyway, so I created my own purpose, and I found where it was relevant in the Redken purpose, so that I felt that I had a personal skin in the game relative to that purpose. So my purpose at that point took me about 2 years to craft, and is still carried today, is to elegantly elevate the debate, connect dots, people, and ideas for a more meaningful existence. And I've wordsmithed this over time. I've adjusted and changed things, but basically, to elegantly elevate the debate is the sort of the big piece.
Yeah.
So whatever I'm doing every day, I want to make sure that a piece of my day is somehow elegantly elevating the debate. So that doesn't mean I don't shy away from having discussions and rigorous conversations, but I do that such that everything I do has to have a piece of this in it if it's a major decision. So each of my books somehow is about elegantly elevating the debate. My podcasts are about elegantly elevating the debate. I mean, so I really strive to add a degree of elegance,
Yeah.
and that can be in the way that I express myself, way I hear people, and then debate. Well, I think we need to learn how to débattre. It comes, I mean, the French word débattre means to fight, right? And so it's not about just sort of flying into the rainbow.
Yeah.
It's about getting gritty and determined and making things happen, making people change. So this is what I have. I have this purpose that I bring with me, and if I can, with a degree of honesty, every day look back at my day and say, that's cool. Tick, got it, figured it out. I'm doing it. Tomorrow, what am I doing? Where am I going to go for it? You have to be intentional about it too.
Yeah.
So for example, I'm so intentional that I color a piece of my agenda every day to figure out where am I actually doing this, Minter. And I'm trying to be real with myself and transparent. I share it with my wife, so she can sort of come back to me and say, Minter, that wasn't very elegant.
Yeah,
And that happens.
she's honest. It's
Oh, yeah.
important to have, isn't it? And I suppose the one question I'd love to have some help with answering, because you said it there, is like to create that better meaning or bigger meaning, is how do you get the people that are, I think it's hedonistic is the right word. Jordan Peterson uses it, and I had to research it. But that actually don't see the meaning. Like, why is that meaning important? Because I get it. I see the difference that we can make in people when they tie into that bigger meaning. But with your experience and the books you've written, how do you explain to someone why that is important?
Well, a lot of people aren't prepared or ready to hear that message. So if you're not ready to change or willing to change somehow, then it's pretty much a dead horse to water.
Yeah,
So I will sometimes use stories to sort of intrigue or bring up, oh, I have a friend, he's really successful, but he's also depressed and burned out. What does that make you think? Oh, well, that's his problem. Oh,
yeah,
okay. Or that, and anyway, so I try to sort of stimulate through a little bit of Socratic questioning and then see where I can go with it. But if the person is like dead set and says, I'm a rock star, but I'm perfectly happy, and good luck to you, dude,
yeah,
and move on. Because I can't, I'm not here to change everybody.
yeah,
I need to find ways to open up the chakras, get people a little bit stimulated. And I suppose at the end of the day, my biggest card opener is modeling the behavior.
yeah,
So a lot of people say, how on earth do you get so much done? Or why is it that you still have energy like you do at the age of 60? How is it that you're so fit on a paddle court? Well, hard work, by the way,
yeah,
intentionality. And if they then are interested or intrigued, then I can sort of layer out maybe some of my things. How did I come across my mission statement? That didn't just sort of come out of thin air. It took me 2 years to really come to grips with it. By the way, the first one was in French, and then I was really trying to sit with these words and see if they really deeply, honestly resonated with me. I'm
yeah,
going to carry this shit to my grave. By the way, of course, they can be subject to change, as big life changing things can happen in your life. But that's what's, how do you get someone who's asleep awake? Um, I think it's difficult, and I think that's maybe the biggest tragedy of life.
yeah. No, so I think it's a great answer, because we use the analogy that sometimes, if you, I mean, whatever, do you believe in the universe, God, whatever religious or higher being you believe in, or if you don't believe in it all, you're on the one end of the spectrum, is they'll throw a pebble and the pebble's going to hit you. And if you don't take that lesson, it's going to throw a stone. If you don't throw a stone, it throws a rock, and eventually it like chucks an asteroid at you. And are you prepared to stick it out until that asteroid comes and there's no escaping? Because it's that same thing that you said, is like, if people really aren't willing to hear it, you doesn't matter what you say, they're just not going to. But the flip side of that actually is, unless they're not doing any great harm to anyone and they are just living their life and buying their Ferrari or just doing it, actually, at the end of the day, that's okay. Sometimes you've just got to let people do their thing, because their lesson might be, their asteroid or their boulder might be coming around the corner. So yeah,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, the argument I have about that, and I mean, only with me or not with them, is that typically those types of people are not particularly good at leading people.
yeah,
They might be good at leading themselves and getting rich and making themselves wealthy, but there are usually a lot of cadavers along the path. And so, no harm to everyone else. I seriously wonder how somebody who's driving a Ferrari is also a really human boss. It's possible,
yeah,
but 65% of employees declare themselves unengaged at work. And I would suggest that the Ferrari owners amongst them have a lot of unengaged employees. And secondly, the Ferrari owner really doesn't know him or herself
yeah,
appropriately. And that will cause issues in the family structure and the way he or she treats other people in his or her ecosystem, including spouse, children, and the like.
yeah. And I think because it's so interesting, there's that whole, coming out of sport into the business world. I was never dawned upon me, was never given to me or told to me or spoken about that. There's a very big difference between being a business owner and being a leader, and then being a good leader in a business. So, I mean, a different way of saying it, you can get a great business owner that's a terrible leader, but you can get a great leader that's a terrible business owner because they're principles within their own. But for some reason, those are being united and spoken about as if they're the same thing somewhere along the line. So I've had to learn that through trial and error and trying to guess, like, oh, but I see there's a difference here. So when I talk about human effectiveness in terms of your leadership and making sure that your leadership in principle is sorted first, they always go, well, that's not business related. And I go, but it really is. Because in order to be a great business owner and a great leader, you have to know both. But you can also get a great leader that's a terrible business owner. So they have to learn that too. But far too often, I feel like there's so much focus in business on being good at your KPIs, being good at your business. And then they say, oh, that's a good business leader. And I'm like, they're not a good leader. They run the business really well, but in 2 or 3 years' time, if you're not a great leader, that I know what's going to happen is you're going to sacrifice people for the greater good because you think the business is more important. And actually, is that really good business? And that's where you come back to, I suppose, everyone's got their own definition of success. If they do a really good business for a year, then they've done a good job.
I would add one more little piece into the pie of those
Yeah.
two. You talk about the business owner and the leader. There's also the entrepreneur, the person who starts up a company, takes on the risks, knows how to bootstrap and get shit done like that, which is a little bit different, I would characterize, than this business owner person
Yeah.
who will include shareholders and people who take other types of risks, if you will, in terms of ownership. But the piece that ties them all together is, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And if you're the leader, I'm doing this for me because I want my second Ferrari or whatever. Well, that sort of hedonistic
Yeah.
turn towards me, it might succeed for you, but it will have damage. And the problem is, when you depart, what's going to take over? And the type of children you might have, or however your inheritors, what sort of people are they going to be? That is questionable. But the notion of why you're doing what you're doing, and if a leader could, or an owner even, know more about themselves, a leader know more about themselves and know how to lead themselves,
Yeah.
including being realistic about who I am, my bad side, I need compensation in certain areas, I'm less good at maths or whatever it is, that allows you to become a better leader. It also, and this is the beautiful piece, allows you to become a better person.
Yeah. And that's, at the end of that, I think, is the most important thing, because you'll be constantly inspiring others by just being a good person and leading yourself and knowing that. And I really try and hammer that home, but it's hard. So it's the same thing as when people don't get it. It's really hard because it doesn't directly relate to money. And it's like, it's going to earn you a hell of a lot more in the long run.
Yeah, and people have a lot of bullshit spray that, like, say bullshit, and part of that bullshit is, well, I don't know how to do it, or I don't want to do it, or I'm afraid of doing it,
Yeah.
and so I'm afraid of actually knowing my dark side, my bad side,
Yeah.
and that fear factor, of course, is going to turn a lot of people into inaction and come out of you otherwise in terms of maybe a health disorder. So the wake up call is, get with the program as soon as you can, because, by the way, everybody, including yourself, will feel better for it.
Yeah. And that's the most important, because you sleep with yourself every night. Hey?
Indeed, you do.
um,
Or not, as your brain goes monkey brain.
yeah, true. So I'll ask you just a couple of other questions. I'll probably say, what scares you the most?
Well, a lot of things used to scare me,
Yeah.
but I've been a fan of a rock and roll band for basically 40 years of my life. I've seen them over 200 times, and they're called the Grateful Dead.
I've
And
heard of them.
not so many people have, but I'm quite the fan. And what's beautiful about that is really this philosophy is, once you know that you die, you become much more grateful today.
Okay.
And so I feel like I've come to peace with my own mortality, and having had several near-death experiences, feel like I'm on borrowed time in this regard, and really try to be grateful. Otherwise, what do I fear? Well, I fear things like my children suffering. I'd rather they didn't, but also I know that's life. You need to go out and do some tackle rugby kids. And that's life if you get a boo-boo. I've had 7 concussions, so
Yeah.
still
Wow.
wonking
Still doing
around.
well.
But trying to be around. Yeah, so that sort of thing worries me. And I suppose within the notion of death, I'd rather not have too much pain as I die.
Hmm.
But you know, um,
I can relate to that one. I'd rather not have too much pain. I always say, like, because my mom lives with us, and she came into, unfortunately, when you live with me and you've got me all the time, there's no escaping any of the excuses that you've got that get in the way. And, I think she was like 65. She fell into the trap of I'm old or I'm getting old. So therefore, and I was like, that's nonsense. That's not like you buying into that. And that kept trying to repeat till eventually she doesn't say it anymore. Because I said to her, I said, if you're going to live to 85, for example, you can either live to 85 old and decrepit, just completely unhealthy because at 65 you decided you were old, or you get to 85 but you're healthy, you're happy, and you just, something happens, you pass away. Which one would you rather have? It's like, obviously I'd rather just be the healthier 85-year-old. I said, well, that choice you make now, not when you're 85. And that just seems to have like elevated her thinking to be like, to give her less excuses to buy into, like, oh, okay, I'm getting older, so I have to work harder, but I still have a choice. And so it was like, at the end of the day, giving her the choice. And it's a very important point. Even if you're 35, the choices you make now are going to make it easier to make the harder choices at 65 than if you choose to buy into any excuse that comes in your way and only decide at 65 to make that difference. Does that resonate?
well, the only thing that I'm thinking about now is the industry that has been created about avoiding death and aging.
Yeah.
There's $89 billion spent on anti-aging creams and
Wow.
$640 billion being spent on anti-senescence and immortality. And I think in this regard, we've gone absolutely freaking bonkers. So avoiding pain in death, but not avoiding adventure,
Yeah.
risk, and the end of life. My one of my favorite sayings is this: an adventure without risk is not an adventure,
Hmm.
and a life without adventure is really no longer a life worth living. So add adventure, add play, like Jordan Peterson says, add a little bit of risk, a little bit more risk, and just shit happens,
Yeah.
deal with it, because life isn't about avoiding risk and living a longer life. It's living a fuller life that's really counts, and dealing and how you dealt with shit.
Yeah. I like that. I think we come here to get an experience. And, maybe this ties into why it's important to wake up is how much of an experience are you getting rushing through your morning, getting to work on time, leaving to take your 2 weeks holiday? For what? What kind of experience is that? And if you are in that space, are you able to be present with, if it's your kids that you've got or the things around you? And it's like, there's a very big difference between being present and actually being present and taking it in. Like, if you just sit still and be quiet, do you now suddenly start to hear the birds singing or the wind in the trees because you've given yourself the time to, as opposed to if you're sitting there and you block all those things out because your mind is so busy, even though you're sitting there. So I think it's an important point. And then last question, what's been the hardest bit that no one knows about?
Yourself.
Okay.
I interviewed a woman called Michelle Nevarez, and I'm forever thankful for the word that she said on my podcast, which was, it takes more than a lifetime to get to know yourself. There's a bunch of studies that say 10 to 15% of people have a good idea of who they are,
Yeah.
and the rest of us are all floating around. And I feel like the idea of getting to know who you are at the very beginning, when you have children, like, who do you want to be? I want to be a fireman or whatever. Well, the thing is, children have to do shit to get a little bit of an understanding of what life's about. And you want to be a CEO, but you're an 18-year-old. Oh, that's why I want to do an entrepreneur. Well, good luck with leading that company, since you had no experience leading people and such and so forth. So you need to do stuff. But then at one point, you need to figure out, well, what's it all about, and who do I want to be as an individual? and getting off that gravy train and then digging in on who am I really and what are my weak points, what are my naughty points, because we all have a naughty point, we all
Yeah.
have bad sides, and getting in bed with those things and learning about them, learning to deal with them, maybe understand where they come from. All these things I think are the harder piece. And but once you do sort of plunge into it, you're never going to get 100% answer because it's an imperfect world. And Michelle said it might never be 100% knowledge. However, I think that for me is the individual responsibility, taking on who I am and becoming a better person somehow within the context of who I am. That's realistic and in full knowledge of the fact that I will disappear and I'm really absolutely meaningless in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. And that is, it's like that paradox or the duality of I'm absolutely meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but I am so meaningful in what I can do today.
Exactly.
And it's not one or the other. It's understanding the both, because that allows you to tap into a deeper humility, that you're not acting for yourself when you say that you have meaning. You're actually acting for something that will never directly revert back to you. So that reward center versus responsibility centered motivation, I think it's fantastic, isn't it? Um,
Well
and
put,
Minter,
sir.
sorry.
Well put.
Thank you. Is there any last words that you'd want to say to someone in the audience? You can obviously plug anything that you want to plug, or a bit of advice or a takeaway.
Well, in the realm of plugging, if you absolutely need to read a book, I would love it if you did.
Yeah.
My film and book, The Last Ring Home, is a tremendous story of courage, love, and honor, about which I think our society could have more of. And then, yeah, maybe my last word is this: change is for sure, growth is the option.
Yeah. I love that. And think about that one and write it down. Minter, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming here. And I know there was so much more to unlock, perhaps sometime in the future. All right.
Life is like that. It was a great journey. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks very much, Minter. Cheers.